I'm Cheryl Chumley. This is Bold and Blunt, giving you a Christian conservative view of news, politics, culture, and events. Troy Miller, CEO of NRB, it is so great to have you here with me today. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, Cheryl, it's great to be with you again. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I love having you on Bold and Blunt. And this is the first time we've done videos, so it's great to see you as well. We just both you and I just got back from a trip to Israel, and part and parcel of the trip to Israel was the response the Israel people gave to the release of the hostages. And what's your take on that? It's all good now in Israel, or are there other issues with Hamas that still need to be cleared up?
Well, I think there's definitely a celebration going on about the hostages being released, and that was a huge relief to people, and the bodies coming home as well for those families to finally have closure. But I think the mood that I at least felt, even on the street walking around Jerusalem, is kind of a cautious optimism. People are hopeful, and this war has gone on a long time. They're hopeful, but I don't think people really believe that this is over. I don't certainly believe it's over. I don't think Hamas, and we've seen this recently, they're just going to drop their arms and walk away. And look, Iran has restarted its rhetoric as well.
And the thing is, the Israel people absolutely love President Donald Trump, right? I mean, there is no schism there.
No, there's no schism there. Matter of fact, I think on my phone, I bet I have a half a dozen pictures from around town and around the country of these huge "We Love Donald Trump" signs and banners that were all over. Even on a big factory way up north, there was a huge sign that said, "Thank you, Donald Trump." So there's no real schism there between the two administrations. I think this administration truly hopes to have peace, but I think the same thing from insiders here. I think there's a very cautious optimism that this is going to hold.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a bit, because nobody in Israel will speak critically about President Trump because they love him. And more than that, they trust him. They trust that he loves Israel. And I agree. I think he has Israel's best interests at heart, right after America's best interests. But I've looked at that 20-point peace plan. And if I'm an Israel citizen, there are points in there that would concern me, namely the one that grants amnesty to Hamas terrorists who agree to abide the terms of the rest of the agreement. What are you hearing about the 20-point peace plan behind the scenes that nobody wants to say out loud?
Well, again, I think I've heard the same thing you've heard. I think people have said, that it's really kind of weighted one-sided. Israel isn't really getting a whole lot out of that plan unless peace comes out of this. But again, I don't think anybody actually believes that peace plan is going to come to fruition. I think they're happy that these first few steps have come in, but I don't think anybody truly believes Hamas is going to disarm. There's this radicalness I think that we don't really understand in the West. We should. But this is not a geopolitical war. This is not a war even over the statehood of Palestine or the quote Palestinian people. It's a war over real ideologies and worldviews, and one worldview is all about dominance. That's what radical Islam is about in the region. They don't want peace with Israel. They don't want Israel, period.
And really, I've gone so far as to put it as a religious war, basically,
Right.
and nobody wants to acknowledge that. And logically speaking, you can understand that, because when you say religious war, it opens a can of worms. It's just very difficult to dodge out of. But if we don't recognize the roots of it, how can those on the side of sanity and peace actually win?
Right. That's been a problem all along, I think, with the U.S. foreign policy is they've failed to recognize that this is at the root of it. I call it an ideological war, but the root of that is religious dogma. It's religious belief, specifically held by the Islamists, these radical Islamists. And you're right. If we don't recognize that, if we don't recognize that that is the root of all the problems behind this and how deeply rooted that is, then we're going to keep creating these peace plans that are just going to fail over and over again.
Because if you look at the dogma of Islam, and not all Muslims agree with this and not all participate in it, but if you look at some of the guiding principles of Islam, it's to destroy, to kill those who will not abide Islam, who will not bow down to Islam. And we're seeing that now in Nigeria, which you just came from Nigeria. And I found it very interesting and insightful that you said, of all the places you've been in the world, you really haven't been so concerned for personal safety as you were in Nigeria. Talk a little bit about what you saw there.
Yeah, because Nigeria, this is the country that in the north, as we know, there's again, it's the radical Islamic movement. It's mainly backed by the Muslim Brotherhood and some factions of ISIS. When the scales tipped and they became a minority or in the majority in the north, then Islam showed its true radical colors, and they really went on a tear. They've gone on a terror spree. Thousands of Christians have been murdered, raped, assaulted, driven out of their homes, had their crops and livelihood destroyed. In this, and then in the South, you have a country that's really in chaos because you have all these roaming gangs. And one of the ways they make their money is by kidnapping Westerners. So everywhere we went, we had almost a full military kind of guard with us, even just going a few miles down the road. So it's really a country that's in crisis right now. But the crisis in the north is nothing short of a genocide.
Is this White House taking the excuse me, the proper steps toward directing the violence in, or toward dealing with the violence in Nigeria? Are there recommendations that you, being on the ground there, could offer?
Well, I think I think the White House has made some right steps. I think designating Nigeria a country of particular concern, which changes the whole way our foreign policy deals with them. But also the recent, I guess, promises, threats by the president to military intervene in the north. I actually think it's going to take a military intervention to stop the bloodshed there. I don't think that the government in Nigeria is capable of stopping what's going on in the north. It may be where we have to have at some point boots on the ground.
Yikes to many Americans on that, right? So, if you're making the case to the American people about the need to intervene militarily in Nigeria, what would you say outside of the persecution of Christians?
Well, look, I mean, you're talking about, it's not just Christians, it's anybody who's not Islamic in the north. And again, as I said, in the south, you have so many of these gangs that are roaming around. This is a real humanitarian crisis. Let's go beyond just the Christian persecution. This is a humanitarian crisis because the areas that are not affected by the violence are affected by embargoes, not being able to get the food that they need to get. So the pressure that's happening here, if this was in any other country, any other people, we would have already been calling for a UN forces to be in there, or for US or for whoever to be in there to protect these people. I think it's just gone silent for so long by the mainstream media in particular because it was predominantly Christian persecution.
Yeah, nobody really has paid much attention to the area as far back as I can remember, really. Where we do look, though, for infractions and infringements upon religious freedom is in China. And I know there was a congressional report, or there was a report just presented to Congress that said China's persecution of religion is turning into a national security issue for America. I wanted to know if you could speak to that, but also talk about some of these other areas in the world where religious persecution is going on that we would be surprised.
Yeah, I think we'd be very surprised. Let's talk about China a second. China, for the last, I think pre-COVID, had started to crack down on Christians in the country, to crack down on home churches. They closed a number of churches that they had allowed for almost a decade to be registered with the state and meet. Now those churches have had to push underground, and China has a real, I think, making a concerted effort, not only in China to crack down on Christians because they see this as a threat to the communist government, but also to crack down outside of China on those Christian kinds of communications that the church there has really been depending on. So we've seen a lot of censorship coming out of China. And then look, we have things going on around the world. Right now, India is a terrible place. The Hindu nationalism has created a huge amount of persecution in the northern part of the state and the southern part of the state because it's so supported by the government. We have several members over there who own radio and television that are very worried they're not going to get their licenses renewed in the coming years. And then we go into, excuse me, then we go into places like South Korea, staunch ally since the 1950s when America intervened into the Korean War and stopped the communism from going south. But South Korea is now ruled by a radical socialist, and that government has put 2 and I think 3 pastors now in prison for their speaking out about what the government is doing. So we have this around the world. Voice of the Martyrs just said that Christian persecution is at an all-time high around the globe, and the most dangerous religion to be a part of is to be a Christian anywhere around the globe.
And most people don't even realize that, right? Because that's how it's been for some years now. Christianity is the most persecuted religion above all others. I want to just two other issues I wanted to quickly address, and you brought one up when you talked about the socialist in South Korea is responsible for cracking down on religious freedom there. Well, we've had some notable socialists elected to high positions here in America. Zoran Memdani in New York City, on record really as being an anti-Semite. And then also Katie Wilson out in Seattle, another socialist who's taking over a major city. Do we have to worry about religious freedom infringements in these 2 areas in America next?
Absolutely. In these 2 areas, and even places like Minneapolis and other cities that maybe don't have a called out socialist leader yet, but they certainly have that kind of support that's going on. Look, the left and the progressive, especially the socialist progressive, this far left, they really understand something I think most Christians don't understand. They understand that it's the church, it's Christianity, it's the faith in God, it's understanding that there's something above government and there's a reason and a purpose in life outside of society itself. And they understand that belief is the bulwark that's holding back them from steamrolling this country. If you pull religion out of this country, then this country will fall apart in a heartbeat, and they understand that. So I think we're going to see the attacks on religious speech and religious freedom on the rise. Thankfully, we've had a great administration right now, but I don't think that's going to hold, Cheryl.
Sadly, I agree with you. This is the battle in America to retain God-given individual liberties and rights. And look, the last issue I wanted to talk about with you, and I know this is a little bit dicey, politically speaking, so let me just throw my opinion out there and you can respond to it. President Trump is forging deals with Saudi Arabia right now, which is all good economically. It looks good for the Abraham Accords and so forth. But to me, the concern is we're dealing with a country that has a dramatically different view of a worldview based on, again, their Islam religion. And, you just look at the treatment of women, you look at the treatment of those outside the faith, and you have to wonder, where are we going on this journey? So my concerns out there, what's your response to that?
Well, yeah, I have the same concerns. I'm going to tell you, I have a little less concern about Saudi Arabia than I do Qatar, that's in there in the Middle East, because Saudi Arabia, they at least have been able to hold the radical Islamists down in their country. They don't want these folks there. They have a little bit more moderate view of Islam that's there, but it is a concern. But when you look at Qatar and you look at the money that they're spending and the influence that they're spending across this country, I think I just read recently that they're the largest foreign lobbying group in America, is a group from Qatar. And these guys are extremely tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. They're tied to the most radical Islam movement that's going on around the world in the Middle East. And that really bothers me, how close of ties that we're getting with this organization, because I don't think they can be trusted at all.
Troy Miller, it's always great to have your insights. I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt, the video version. And I look forward to seeing you on December 4th at the Museum of the Bible. Talk a little bit quickly about that event.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. I look forward to seeing you as well, because you're going to be leading a panel that's actually going to be talking about Christian persecution and what's going on around the world, and what we as Christians can do to be able to, make a change here and make an effect change in this area.
Yeah, very, very important panel discussion. Look forward to seeing you. And look, God bless. Thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt.
Thanks again.